Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wild and Tame at the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh. It's wonderful to see you all here this evening. I'm Mary Fraser. I have the honour of working at the college as the Director of Education, Training and Assessment. But in a past life, I was also a veterinary surgeon. So I was really quite excited about this presentation this evening and all the materials that you've been able to see in the museum. So I'm chairing this evening. Just some brief housekeeping. We are not expecting any fire alarms. So if the alarm does sound, then please make your way out to the exits and outside the college. I'm going to just get straight in because I know you're all desperate to get back to see the rest of the presentation. And our first speaker this evening is Professor Angela Thomas, who is our Director of Heritage and Honorary Librarian.
Well, you'll be pleased to know I've timed my speech and it's under 4 minutes, so that's not too testing. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to add my welcome to the Wild and Tame Animals in History exhibition. It's our 7th exhibition since the first in 2019, but sadly for me, it's my last as Heritage Trustee and Honorary Librarian. I'll shortly be handing over my white protective gloves, my red velvet rope, and my spare acid-free paper to the next person who'll come. I think the interviews are tomorrow, so I don't know who it'll be yet, after 7 years working with the library team. Personally, we have many vets in our family, but I took the easier route and became a doctor, a paediatric haematologist here in Edinburgh. But however, not all my patients turned out to be human. I was contacted by colleagues from the Dick Vet fairly early on when there were specific blood-related problems with their pups, kittens, and foals. We made some interesting diagnoses of rare disorders, which were akin to some human blood diseases. The most memorable for me were a neutrophil disorder. Now, neutrophils are cells which fight bacterial disease, similar to something called chronic granulomatous disease in humans, and it was Bubble Cat that presented with this disease, and I hope I'm not crossing the line and breaking any confidentialities here using the name. The other memorable moment was a standard bred colt that was bleeding into his fetlocks and was also diagnosed as being depressed. He was cured with large doses of vitamin K into his oats, and he perked up no end. So in return for this advice I was giving, I sought advice for our black goldfish, and apparently, well, you can get black goldfish, who was not up to his or her, I wasn't quite sure, usual swimming prowess. His category when I rang up the Dick Vet turned out to be small animal exotic. And after discussion of symptoms, I was advised to try whiskey in a small tank. Now, actually, I was unable to source a small tank of whiskey, so I decanted the fish into a classic fish bowl, added a teaspoon of the said liquid, and he died a very happy goldfish. Well, it turns out inevitably that learning more about medicine from studying animals and vice versa is nothing new. And this exhibition, Wild and Tame, explores the history of animals, real and imagined, and their impact on human lives and culture. From unicorns and the first Renaissance animal encyclopedia to Charles Darwin, our exhibition shows how humans exploited animals and how they cared for them, creating our shared history. The exhibition has 3 themes. It begins by exploring the beginnings of medical care for animals, as well as the role animals played in the development of modernizing medicine for humans. The second theme shows the changing ways we depicted animals and studied them, finally unlocking the mysteries of evolution and our place in the natural world. The third theme explores the vital role animals played in our cultural history, from myths and monsters to modern pets and companions. The exhibition, which many of you will have started to see or have seen perhaps already, highlights include a 16th century animal encyclopedia with over 1,500 illustrations of animals by Conrad Gesner. And there's also a 17th century drawing of a whale stranded in the Firth of Forth by Robert Sibbald, who was the founder of the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh and also of the Botanical Gardens. Sadly, it's rather topical at the moment because of the whale pod that was stranded on the island of Sandy in the Orkneys just now. We're very proud to exhibit the first edition of one of the most important books in the history of science, Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So also on display, this is slightly different from such an esteemed book as Darwin's, is a replica Fiji mermaid. A grotesque version of the mermaid. I thought it was actually real when I first saw it, but I was told by Kate that it was made by sawing the top half of a monkey onto and fixing it to the bottom half of a fish. So for those of you who think that the mermaid is real, I'm very sorry to disappoint you. Also, continuing the theme of mythical creatures, in Pierre Pomme's 18th century A Complete History of Drugs, there are 5 different types of unicorn. So I'd like to say an enormous thank you to Estella Ducan and Kate Aikenhead, who curated this exhibition so expertly, and also to Daisy Cunningham, who, as manager of the library, has curbed all my wild and tame tendencies. Thank you. And I hand back to Mary.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for all the work that you have done within Heritage. We're going to miss you. Our next speaker is Professor Erica Fudge. Erica is Professor of English Studies at the University of Strathclyde, with a research focus on animal studies and Renaissance studies. She has varied research interests, including the history of dreams, the history of laughter, and the history of bladder control. There might be a bit of a theme this evening. Animal topics she has researched include wearing fur, animal experimentation, meat eating, and the history of pet ownership. She's on the editorial board of a number of journals, including the Society and Animals and the Animal Studies Journal. And she has written a number of books, including Killing Animals, Renaissance Beasts, and Pets, Art of Living. Erica, can I ask you to come forward?
Thank you. It's a really, really nice invitation to come and talk to you about some strange stuff that I hope you find interesting. So officially the title is Human and Animal Health, A Historical Perspective. But as I was writing it, I realised that a better title was probably How Am I Different, given that I am the same as everything else? And that is an early modern problem. So the medical idea that was dominant in the 16th and early 17th centuries, the period that I'm going to talk about, is coming from the classical period, from the work of Hippocrates and later Galen. And core to their medical ideas were the idea of the humours. That is, this idea that there were liquids that flowed around the body. And this is plant bodies, human bodies, animal bodies. Everything has humours. These humours are not only specific to the individual, they also link the individual to the larger universe. So here is a self-explanatory grid that I will explain to you. So, if you see in brown, we've got the liquids or the humours, so black bile, phlegm, blood, choler. Some of these terms will still remain very kind of familiar, so choleric, for example. That attaches itself to a nature, so if you've got too much blood, you are likely to be more sanguine than someone who's got a lot of phlegm, who will be phlegmatic, that is kind of calm. This, in turn, is linked to organs of the body, so the choler comes from the gall. But it's also, and this is where it gets interesting, linked to, on the one hand, an elemental force. So melancholy is linked to the earth, which is perceived to be dry, as opposed to choler, which is linked to fire, which is hot. But it's also linked to seasons of the year. So the likelihood is, the argument would be, every individual creature becomes slightly more melancholic in the autumn. Yep. That will be the point where we all slightly shift. When it comes to the summer, you will become slightly more choleric. The heat gets to you, it raises your heat and so on and so forth. I think they've never lived in Glasgow to understand that. But it also then gets this sense of the human body is perceived to be what's called the microcosm of the larger universe. So what's happening out there is happening in here. And that's the case for plants, it's the case for animals, and it's the case for humans. So we get nice explanations like this, how these things impact who we are. So this is Gervase Markham, 1607, and there's a Gervase Markham book out in the exhibition, I was pleased to see. He says, according to the predominance or regency of that element of which he doth most entirely participate, so for the most part are his humours and addictions and inclinations. For if he have most of the earth, then is he melancholic, dull, cowardly, and subject to much faintness? If you have most of the water, then is he phlegmatic and full of sloth, ill-understanding, faint-spirited, and subject to much tenderness? If you have most of the air, then is he sanguine, free of spirit, bold, nimble, and pleasant? If he participate most of the fire, then is he choleric, light, free, stirring, and full of anger? So these are the character types. And if you know your kind of comedies from the late 16th and early 17th century, they will often have these types. There's the melancholic, there's the sanguine, there's the phlegmatic, and they play against each other. Now, the ideal body has blood as the most abundant humour. So you're sanguine, you're kind of optimistic and sort of nimble, as that explanation had it. But actually, that's never going to happen. These ideas are translated into the Christian universe of the 16th century. And that tells us that after the fall, the body never worked properly. Before the fall, before Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge, their bodies would have been in pure equilibrium, just as the animals obeyed Adam and Eve. After the fall, the animals stop obeying and your bodily humours go all out of control. There's a connection between those two. And so you never get total health. What happens is diseases are understood, like sin, like wildness in animals, to upset the humoral balance of a body. And so medicine's role is to reset how the balance is operating. So if you have a disease that is perceived to be too hot, you need to cool down. If it's too moist, you need to dry out. So this is the logic of this kind of humoral medicine. So activities become really important. So you might, if you had a disease that was perceived to be cold and dry, be told to get more sleep, because sleep was believed to be moist and warm. On the other hand, if you were too moist and warm, you might be told to get out and get some exercise, because that would dry you out and cool you down, and so on and so forth. So there is this real sense of balance in how things work. If you had too much blood, if you were a bit giddy, you might have your blood let. So there's leeches and there's bloodletting, and there's some horrible bloodletting tools out there that you can look at that just look absolutely horrible. If you've got too much bile, too melancholy, for example, you might be given an emetic, so you would vomit it up. So this is how this is perceived to be balancing you out. Now, think about how this is working, because it then obviously links through to questions about eating. And it's linked through to questions about eating on the basis of a phrase that we still have, this idea of a balanced diet. Yep, we have that in terms of carbs and proteins and so on. They have it in terms of hot, cold, wet, dry, and all those sorts of things. So this is coming from a really helpful little blog on the Fudge Library website. You need to know what you are in order to know how to eat properly. At the bottom of this page, you can go on here, you can do your temperaments test online. I won't offer you any advice as to whether it's true or not. I think one of them is choose the animal between an otter, a lamb, a lion, and a something else. Anyway, it turns out I'm phlegmatic, you'll be pleased to know. But you eat according to your temperament. So one of the things is what you like to eat might tell you about your temperament. So I like vinegar and lemons. That might hint that I am a bit melancholic. If I have too much vinegar and lemon, that will push my melancholy too far. So I need to go the opposite direction and eat some sanguine food. And sanguine food includes basil, sugar, butter, peacocks, and lamb. Now, I'll come to thinking about how animals and things fit into this. But can you see the logic? Because I think we look at this as if it's like barking mad. One of the contraception devices that could be used in this period, apparently, is peppercorns in the vagina. Work it out. Peppercorns will be hot and dry. By implication, they believe that you will be more likely to conceive if your vagina was moist and warm. Yeah? That's the logic of... It's not just that they are just these crazy people. There is a logic that underpins it that looks crazy because we have our own logics. Brackets. We've just lived through a lockdown. Our logic wasn't that great. Yeah? Let's bear that in mind. So, we've got these different food stuff. So we go to a text like Thomas Cogan's Haven of Health. Peppercorns are hot and dry in the 4th degree. This is what Galen brought. So 4th degree, it's like you've got this kind of scheme. 4 is top. It's like the hottest chili, yeah? So this is like if you really need hot and dry, you go to a peppercorn. Radish is hot in the 3rd degree and dry in the 2nd. So they're getting quite nuanced with how you put this. And it says here, they are much used to be eaten with mutton roasted at supper. And I think we should think about that not just as about taste, but potentially about medical, what balances the wetness of a mutton is the dryness of a radish, and so on and so forth. Plums, on the other hand, are cold and moist in the 2nd degree. So you've got this real sense that you could buy a book like Thomas Cogan's, work out what your illness is, and then go through it and say, okay, I must avoid radishes, but I need a few more plums, and so on and so forth. It then gets to meat. Galen affirmeth that beef maketh gross blood and engendereth melancholy, especially if it be much eaten, and if such as do eat of it be melancholy complexion. For in those, saith he, it breedeth melancholy diseases as cankers, scabs, leprosy, fevers, quartains, and such like. So you've got this list of melancholic illnesses. So by default, you don't want to eat anything that's melancholic if you're likely to get leprosy. So that's my advice. If you take one thing away from today, don't take the vaginal peppercorns away. Lamb, he goes on, is very moist and phlegmatic, and mutton is full of excrement and maketh ill blood. So you can see the aging of the mutton changes its nature just as an old person gets older. We're meant to dry out and so become more likely to melancholy and so on. So you go through a life scheme just as you've got the seasonal changes. But here's a really interesting one. In a world where we're thinking about kind of one medicine, one health, swine's flesh, he goes on, is most commended of Galen above all kinds of flesh in nourishing the body. So it be not of an old swine, yeah, we've learnt that, and that it be well digested of him that eateth it, and that it giveth more steadfast and strong nourishment. Now, why is pig's flesh so good? The flesh of swine hath such likeness unto man's flesh, both in savour and taste, that some have eaten man's flesh instead of pork. Yea, swine's blood and man's blood be so like in everything, that hardly they can be discerned. And this is a trope that keeps going through the Renaissance. Oh, yeah, it tastes like pork. Yeah. And it's like, what happened? How did they do this? But I think the interesting thing is, it's like with like is another way. So you've got the opposite version, but then you've got, if you're healthy, you want to just keep healthy. Eating humans becomes medically sensible. But obviously you can't do that because there are laws. So you eat pigs because they are most like humans. But it's a really interesting thing. Now, I quoted from Gervase Markham earlier. This is actually a quotation from his book about horses, Cavalleria. And he is talking about the character of horses. Now, everything that was said applies to humans. But what he adds to it is this idea of the colour of a horse being a marker of its humoral makeup. So a choleric horse is full of anger, and it's likely to be bright sorrel, coal black without white, or pied. So you know when you're buying a horse, the advice you're given here is that this horse is likely to have this temperament because of its external. That gets transferred to humans because we've got that idea of the ruddy, red-faced, cheerful person is about sanguine, having lots of blood in you. And so again, this idea of the animal and the human is working at the level of appearance too. So in the midst of all this, human bodies and animal bodies were recognised as being made up of the same humours, suffering from the same illnesses, and were treated with the same remedies. And I heard a talk at a History of Medicine conference that's been taking place at Strathclyde for the last few days, and someone said the big difference in cow medicine, horse medicine, and human medicine is that cow medicine has really cheap ingredients in this period. But basically the principles remain similar. Louise Hill-Kurth, who's a historian she's very careful to call it animal health care rather than veterinary medicine, because veterinary medicine is a kind of late 18th, early 19th century professional education. She says that readers of early modern almanacs were urged to follow a proper health regime and to provide a similar one for their animals. And when they say similar, they mean similar. So this is a book called The Widow's Treasure, and often these kind of oral histories of healthcare are coming out of perceived women. These are the women who are running the household. So they would be the kind of recipients of their mother's understanding of health and so on. This is obviously written by a man called John Partridge, so he's taken, or he's proposing that he's taking, female knowledge and presenting it in print. One of the recipes in this is, the water which standeth in the hollows of beeches in beech trees doth perfectly cure naughty scurf and wild tetters or scabs of men, horses, kine, cows and sheep, if they be washed withal. And I think that's so interesting that it's at the level of skin. It's like we get the organs are going to be similar. These are all what we would call mammals. But there's a sheep with its wool and a horse with its thick. And then there's us. Same cure. So there's this real sense of similarity. And I think that is something, and I'm sure Anna's going to talk about this, that is kind of, we're trying to get back to, not peppercorns, leave the peppercorn, but that same sense of a continuum, which of course Darwin gave us another narrative for in the 19th century. So given all that, where does difference lie? What makes a human human? Because that's the obvious question. And we go to another classical figure, we go to Aristotle. In De Anima, a text from about the 350 before the Christian era, he argued that there were three kinds of soul: the vegetative, the sensitive, and the rational. So what does that mean? So the vegetative soul is shared by plants, animals, and humans, and is the cause of nutrition, growth, and reproduction. So we all do that. Yeah? A plant will kind of put out its roots to reproduce, to feed itself, and so on. The sensitive soul is possessed by animals and humans alone. So plants don't have a sensitive soul in this model. And it's the source of perception and movement. So that's what allows humans and animals to see something and move towards it, or see something and move away from it. A plant in this argument is just stuck. Yeah? It can't decide to move towards something, although we know they can. Finally, there's the rational soul. And that's found only in humans and houses faculties that make up the thing we call reason, which is in this model from the Renaissance, from classical times through to the Renaissance, including things like will, so that is the decision-making process, I've decided to do something, intellect, and intellective memory. Now, just to be clear, here's a lovely 16th century image of the brain. This is a brain that an animal will have a version of too, because this is a brain that is reliant on external stimuli. So you can see we've got this eyes, mouth, tongues, and all the rest of it. And at the front of the brain is the common sense, the sensus communis. Yeah? So you see things and it goes into the front of the brain, and that allows you to either, having seen green and seen people, I can imagine green people, for example. I put the things I've seen together. You can fantasize, you can invent whole worlds in which people are living in different ways. You can think, you can do philosophy, and you can estimate. How far do I think that is? If I jump, can I get over that? And then at the back of the brain, there's memory. And this is why apparently the Renaissance says, when somebody says, do you remember? You go, let me think. You're rousing the back of your brain. This is the argument. So we've got this kind of physical brain. What the rational soul is doing is something inorganic. It's like it's allowing you to have all that and do what they call prudence. Given that I know this and I know that, can I predict a future? Can I foresee what bringing those together? Can I do abstraction? Yep. That's what we can do that horses can't do. This is the argument they're making. Now, of course, we might all dispute that greatly and say, well, we know horses can do abstract thinking. Aristotle didn't. This is the model that's used. Now, so we've got this idea of human reason. That's a very familiar idea. The thing we do is sometimes language, sometimes politics. This is all coming out of Aristotle. We are capable of things that animals are not. And then I sit here and I remember we've all had a glass of wine. And this is where a Renaissance problem comes. In his book called The Delicate Diet for Dainty-Mouthed Drunkards, George Gascoigne calls drunkenness a beastly vice. He says, let me set this down for all my general proposition that all drunkards are beasts. Now that might sound like great kind of just metaphorical language. Oh, they're beastly, awful people, the people who do this. We get another text from a few years later by Thomas Haywood. Calves, goats, swine, asses at a banquet sit, he's got this picture, to grasp healths in their hooves thou seest here met. Why wonderest thou, O drunkard, to behold thy brothers, in whose rank thou art enrolled, when thou so oft as toxed at any feast, canst be no better held than such a beast? Since like Circean cups wine doth surprise thy senses, and thy reason stupefies. So here's the problem. If that is what we are that is different, given that our bodies are also the bodies that are like the universe and the universe is like us and plants and animals, and we have a drink and we get drunk and we lose our reason, we are literally just animals. So in this period, we have this really interesting sense of the human, and this is the frontispiece, as on the edge of animal, always. You can become a beast by drinking, that's a great example. You can become a beast by giving into your libido. You can become a beast by eating too much cake. The beast is right there inside us, and that is the medical object that gets treated. The philosophical and the moral object is the one who reaches for the drink. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it with you. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Quite fascinating. I loved the nuggets of truth that you had in some of the areas you were talking about. I noticed the word sentience on one of your slides there, and that being what makes animals and humans different. And yet, even today, we're still arguing about sentience in animals and which animals are sentient or not sentient. So I love that we're still arguing about it and still discussing it. And thank you so much for your presentation. Lots to take away from that. Our next speaker this evening is Miss Anna Radford. Anna is a consultant paediatric surgeon and urologist at Hull University Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust and a consultant paediatric urologist at Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. She's an honorary senior clinical lecturer at Hull York Medical School and a trustee on the board of the Humanimal Trust, a charity founded by Professor Noel Fitzpatrick to encourage collaboration between doctors and vets so that all humans and animals benefit from sustainable medical progress. She studied medicine at Imperial College London and has a PhD from the University of York. Her particular interest is in neuropathic bladders, I said there was a theme, and recurrent urinary tract infections. And she has published dozens of articles on subjects ranging from the benefits of remote consultations to the use of robotics in surgery. Anna, can I hand over to you?
Evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of this event, and I'm really grateful for being invited. So, as Mary said, I'm a paediatric surgeon, which means that my talk will probably run on longer than I've said it would. I'm basically going to talk about several stories that I think you're either going to appreciate personally or professionally. Wherever I mention names, I have got consent for that. As I say, most of us in this room will have been involved or been touched by animals on a personal level. Whether that's like me, being with my uncle on a farm, tending to young lambs, being chased by dogs on my dad's milk round, which wasn't a fond memory. the companion animals that we have that come in and out of our lives. We all gain from those type of interactions. But then I come to my professional life, and I'm lucky enough to have met many patients who have benefited from devices or products that have directly come from animals, or drugs that have been tested on animals. And you can see there's a disparity there. From all the benefit we gain from animals, what are they getting back? During COVID, I became aware of the Humanimal Trust, and I'm now a trustee with them, as Mary mentioned. Paediatric surgeons, paediatricians are very much like veterinarians. My patients either cannot speak to me or will not speak to me in the case of teenagers. I get most of my history from caregivers, like vets. Examinations can be challenging. You sometimes get punched or kicked. I operate on babies as young as 20 weeks of gestation. That's half of the whole time they're supposed to be in the womb. So they're very premature. They're fetuses. Their tissues are different. They weigh less than 500 grams, up to the 100 kilogram teenagers, particularly in Hull, where I work. So I'm going to start with talking about animal and human health from the start, evolution. And if you think about your hand, that shows what we call homology in biology to a bird's wing or a fish's fin. It's true for many organs in the body, and the reason I'm walking around a bit like a TED presenter, which I'm not used to doing, is because of my spine. A few weeks ago, I bent down to pick a tomato leaf off the greenhouse floor and felt a pop. The red arrow is pointing to the disc in question, which isn't protruding much, but enough to press on a nerve that runs down my spine. And whilst I was thinking about the ridiculous design of the human spine and blaming it on being on two legs, I remembered that Professor Noel Fitzpatrick operates on four-legged animals for exactly the same reason. So all chordates have embryological similarities. That's why human fetuses can look like strange lizards with gills. The spinal cord and column in chordates is called the notochord. There are many theories as to where the notochord come from in terms of evolution. And what I have learned over the last few years is when there are many different theories, no one knows the answer. But one theory that I read that I liked, because it involved the humble ragworm, was that a group of scientists used the same markers for genes that light up chordate notochords and tested ragworm spines, known as the axochord. The axochord allows the ragworm to swim. If you destroy it, they can't swim. There's a homology there. The only difference along the evolutionary scale is that there are other substances produced that change the axochord into vertebrae, discs, and a spinal column. I'm now going to talk about infectious diseases, and probably zoonosis is a term that a lot of you would be more familiar with now since COVID. And infections are a really complex interplay between host and the host immune system and bacteria. Whether you believe that the coronavirus originated from pangolins, bats, was man-made from a laboratory in Wuhan, was able to spread to different species, which resulted in the culling of hundreds of mink in Norway, or whether you believe that the gorillas in the New York Zoo benefited from vaccinating against COVID. It goes to show that we are really interlinked, and we're beginning to realise that more and more. And it's becoming a global issue. So how are we investigating disease? I'm going to talk about animals used as disease models. Part of my PhD involved using antibodies derived from animals. I've designed a tissue-engineered bladder structure from pig bladders. But there's an issue here, it's models. And I'll come on to why these can cause problems in my next slide. Urinary tract infections are a particular fond thing for me. And I wanted to know why people were getting recurrent infections. Why is it that one person's more likely to have problems than another? And in terms of the host, in the bladder, there are receptors that react to bacteria called toll-like receptors. And they help you mount an immune response. As you do when you're starting to be interested in something, you look at the literature. And when I look at the literature, it says toll-like receptor 4, very, very important. But it was based in rodent models. You carry on reading, and you find that when you try to translate that knowledge to humans, they came across a problem. Because it's more complex than that. It's more complex than that single gene that's been removed from that mouse that will not allow it to fight infection. And actually in humans, toll-like receptor 5 is probably more important. It's found in 5 to 10% of the population to be coded as slightly different, which is why some women get more recurrent infections. But they're cheap, but they're flawed. Modern alternatives include artificial intelligence and on-chip organs and disease modelling, but they're models, again. So why don't we use naturally occurring disease that happens in humans and animals to tell us about that disease and help us to treat? There are positives, and I'm going to focus on that in a minute, but I want to talk about the negatives. Hitler was a really big negative. A very detestable character, I have to say, in human history. Mac, one of my foster dogs, had his moments as well, but as a whole, far more lovable. What they had in common was one testicle. And it's now been proven. There were some medical records found in 2015, so it's not just a fable. Undescended testis happens in 1 in 25 boys. 1 in 100 will need treatment for that. Nearly 7 in 100 dogs have this as well, like Mac. A very forward-thinking group of veterinary scientists decided to compare the testicles that hadn't come down properly from dogs and compare that to humans. And what they found was that the histopathological changes were very, very, very similar. And there were features that were consistent with the impact, such as subfertility and the risk of testicular tumours. Fantastic, we've got a model. We also have a problem because we work in silos. We work in echo chambers. This group of veterinary scientists, although being forward-thinking and doing a comparative study, had clearly not spoken to people like me. Because although they found a great model, one of their conclusions was we might be able to find compounds to treat subfertility and also to prevent the risk of testicular tumour formation. Well, I operate on these boys at 6 months of age to a year of age to prevent these problems. I don't need compounds. And it's really important that that ball is down so that they can feel for lumps and bumps in the future. So compounds aren't going to cut it. Neither are tumour markers, although I buy into that slightly, but my big question here was why in this paper was there no mention at all about this benefiting dogs. So back to infections. And I'm going to focus more on bacteria here. Bacteria love fluid that is static, be that sputum, blood, or urine. And it can be static for various reasons. Anatomical abnormalities that can cause blockages. The brain and the blood are not quite working for various reasons, and the bladder not emptying properly. Or the nerves that supply the bladder not working properly, such as spina bifida, which doesn't just affect humans, but also impacts on certain animal breeds, such as Boston Terriers. This is the one operative picture I'm going to show. So this is an anatomical abnormality where the ureter, instead of entering in the bladder, is entering below the bladder neck. So outside the mechanism that keeps you dry. The study in the middle shows that when this person is trying to empty the bladder, urine is going back up towards the kidney, causing stasis of urine that's more likely to get infected. But what's really interesting is that picture is from a Labrador aged 2 who'd been constantly dribbling. This picture is a 2-year-old girl called Faith who'd been constantly dribbling. Exactly the same pathology. Urinary tract infections are common. It doesn't matter whether you're human, you're a dog, you're a cat. Once you've had one, you're more likely to get these again. Urinary tract infections are the most common reason for vets to prescribe antibiotics. And that leads me on to a tale of 2 poppies. Poppy 1 was a cat of a nurse in one of the departments I worked in. Poppy had had recurrent infections for about 6 years, and she'd been treated with lots of different courses of antibiotics. When she was sick, she had a urinary tract infection, got given the antibiotics, and unfortunately died of multi-organ failure due to sepsis, because the infection was resistant to all the antibiotics it was tested against. Poppy 2 had an anatomical abnormality very similar to the pictures that I showed you, and she was a 5-year-old girl. She'd had recurrent infections. She'd been given lots of treatment with antibiotics. She'd been given low-level antibiotics for several years to prevent infections. Because what we know is infections are bad for the kidneys. It causes scarring in about 30%. And that out of that 30%, 10 to 20% will develop hypertension as a result. And that risk is lifelong. So that's why she'd been put on antibiotics. She had a definitive surgery, made a good recovery, but to allow everything to heal, we'd left a plastic tube, a stent in from the kidney to the bladder, and that was there for 6 weeks. She then had a very quick procedure to remove that and got sent home with antibiotics for 5 days. 24 hours later, she came to A&E, not feeling quite right, bit of a temperature, and was admitted for IV antibiotics. Her urine was sent off to the lab. In the morning, she was playing Connect 4 with her mum, chatting away to my colleague, and in the afternoon, she was dead. When we got the urine back from her, 3 days later, her urinary tract infection was also resistant to the antibiotic she was given. 92% of E. coli is resistant to at least one antibiotic. In 2019, 1.95 million people globally died as a direct result of this. By 2050, the World Health Organization estimated that to be 10 million, an extra cost of trillions of dollars. This is a global catastrophe waiting to happen, already happening. It involves not just humans, but all animal kind. Whether it's the food you eat, or don't eat if you're vegan, whether it's your companion animals, whether it's your human loved ones. So why are we not talking to each other? And again, it comes to this silo thinking and echo chambers. The concept of one medicine is this overlap, the collaboration between human medicine, veterinary medicine, biomedical science, and I'll put industry in there as well. Because of Poppy, during COVID, I started to think about how can we make our testing quicker? And the answer is point of care testing, so that you have an answer within an hour or two that tells you, yes, there's an infection. You don't necessarily need to know the bug, but you need to know which antibiotic to give to treat that bug. And as I say, it takes days. When I was looking things up in COVID, I had lots of time. Lots of surgery got cancelled. Okay? Most of my work disappeared overnight. I could focus on my research side of things and focus on why bad things happen. And I found that there were companies, trials, with point-of-care tests providing this information very early, but in veterinary practices. So gone were the days where human medicine was at the forefront. This was something that made me realize that veterinary medicine can be at the forefront as well. And there's lots of reasons for that. But now I'm part of a group with 3 different companies, startup companies and university, international and national, looking at different technologies to provide point-of-care testing for UTIs in animals and humans. What I've also noticed, now I've had my eyes open, is that guidelines for human and veterinary medicine are aligning as well. Going back to my disc, I'm a surgeon, I'm a narcissist. Going back to my disc, the treatment is rest, analgesia, physio, and if I need, surgery. It's the same with animals. When you look at urinary tract infection, steering away from antibiotics as much as possible, better antimicrobial stewardship, it's all there. Non-antimicrobial treatments to prevent infections, such as cranberry extract, D-mannose, Hiprex, that stop the bacteria sticking to the bladder in the first place. Even more exciting is phage therapy. But we need to be a bit cautious because we don't know particularly human response to phages in terms of our immune systems. There's a lot of work currently going on with that. The other thing's vaccines. Vaccines against E. coli. There's several companies that have vaccines that are there, that are being trialled. One of them claims 9 years free from UTI, but it's still in its very early stage. There isn't a vaccine that's being trialled in animal and human together, which is a bit disappointing. Cancer management is a real area of growth. This is breaking those silos down again, just as a reminder. The black dog is mine, Ollie. He died in August, 1st of August last year, so nearly a year, of lymphoma. His treatment followed exactly the same protocol for lymphoma as someone who is human with lymphoma. We didn't give him the CHOP regimen because he was older and he had other issues. But otherwise, he would have followed the same scheme of things. The other dog is Hector, and Hector is the dog of a good friend of mine and a colleague. And Hector was put to sleep last weekend because of osteosarcoma. Osteosarcoma is a very rare bone tumour, but is more common in dogs. Humans, less common, but it's common in children. The fascinating thing is when you put that tumour under a microscope. Canine tumours, osteosarcomas, genetically are very, very similar to paediatric osteosarcomas. The changes. The routes for metastasis are thought to be exactly the same, and there's a lot of joined up thinking. This is a real success story of One Medicine. Some real joined up thinking, looking at how, why, and how we can prevent metastasis of osteosarcoma in humans and dogs. The theme of all these talks has been how we are so integrated. For our future's sake, I hope that we do talk more to each other. There's 2 more stories, and then I promise I'll finish. When my eyes had been opened to One Medicine, I changed as a surgeon. This is Bethany, who has spina bifida. She's now not under my care. She's grown up at college. She loved cats. She has 2 cats named after grime artists. Don't ask me the names. I've forgotten them. There'll be people in the audience who don't know about grime music. You're better off not knowing. But she came in one day because she was having problems with her urinary drainage through her appendix. And she said, "Oh, I love my cats. I love them so much. They come into bed with me." And then I examined her, and I saw this. And I knew, from being a child on a farm, this is ringworm. And so I treated, as a surgeon, very proud of myself, I treated her ringworm. And then I suggested she take her 2 cats to the vet as well. And I got a thank you card from her saying the vet was very impressed. Now, we all know about the health benefits of having animals in your life. Cardiovascular benefits of going for a walk. Mental health benefits. This is Mac again. He had a lot of problems. Mac was the living embodiment of some work that a very clever lady called Helen Ballantyne did with her colleagues. She is exceptional in that she's a registered human nurse, a registered veterinary nurse, and she's worked in transplant and critical care. She spent an awful lot of her life trying to convince people to give up smoking. When we took Mac in, he was from a multi-generational family from Newcastle. And for the first 2 days, he coughed up the most disgusting green phlegm you've ever seen. They all smoked in the household. And it took me a while to figure out that this was him getting rid of the rubbish in his lungs from passive smoking. But what's really interesting is what Helen's team found, that people were not willing to give up smoking to get on a transplant list for their grandchildren, but once they knew it was a risk to their companion animal, they gave up. Go figure. Animals are important to us personally, and we need to realise professionally. So as I say, Humanimal Trust is doing fantastic work through engagement, collaboration, education, increasing awareness, research. They're about to put out a research grant funding, so keep an eye out. I would urge you to go to their website and make their pledge. It's free. And join their hub of professionals and get talking. It doesn't matter whether you're an English professor, whether you're a medical professor, a veterinary professor, a medical student or veterinary student. Doesn't matter. Thank you very much.